and gentlemen, welcome to this very special session here at the Emirates Festival of Literature. My name's Amandeep, and I'm delighted to spend Friday evening with you all. Thank you for joining us. Now, our next guest is a powerhouse, a professor, a writer, medical extraordinaire. And we are very fortunate that he's flown over here especially to speak to you all. I'm not going to give him a very long introduction because I don't want to eat into the time that we have with him today. And I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to promise to share him with you all. We'll be opening up to your questions much earlier than we usually get a chance to. So please, have your thinking caps on. We're going to make this as interactive and as dynamic as possible. Hold me to that promise. And may I make a request of you all. Help me to welcome him back to our festival, back on our stage. Abraham Verghese, please give him a big round of applause. Abraham, welcome. Our audience loves you. We love having you here at the festival. Let's cast our mind back. You were here when your debut novel, soon after your debut novel, became an international sensation. Tell us what's been happening in your life ever since.
Oh, well, that was a long time ago, Amandeep. And first of all, may I say how delighted I am to be here to see so many of you. I must say, when I wrote that novel, and I thought I would be back with another novel much sooner, but I'm a very slow writer. My day job keeps me kind of busy, but that's not the only excuse. It was just a slow process. So I'm very happy to be back and to see how much this festival has grown. So thank you.
So we're here, of course, to celebrate your latest novel, an epic saga. I must say that my book has been loved dearly. It looks like it's been read about 6 different times, and I think maybe I'm close to this as well. Before we get into the book, you mentioned your day job. You're based at Stanford University. Give our audience an insight in terms of what the day job entails and how you make time for writing.
Well, Stanford has been very, very good for me. I think I've worked at 5 different medical schools within America since I finished my training. And I was always writing in the evenings and weekends. But Stanford was the first to sort of treat my writing as the research equivalent of my scientific colleagues. And so I have some protected time. I actually have a secret office with somebody else's name on it. And I can tell you the room number, but then I have to kill you shortly after that. So it's been a wonderful place to work, but I still attend on the wards, but I can do it pretty much when I choose to keep my hand in, and I teach the chief residents and the students, and I love doing that.
And it just begs the question how you can make the time. I always wonder when we have such fantastic authors like yourself on the stage, do you have more hours in the day than the rest of us?
No, I really don't, and I think, if you look at my productivity since 1994, I've written 4 books, which isn't really a hell-breaking breakneck pace by any means. Joyce Carol Oates has written 4 books since breakfast this morning. So, I'm a slow writer, but I'm not in a great hurry either. I'm just happy to try and get it right. It certainly didn't mean to take 14 years on this, but so I write when I can. I really don't have the luxury of just setting a timetable. Even though I have protected time, I'm my own worst enemy, and I wind up, giving it to other causes. So I do the best I can, but I realize that at my current age, if I really want to be writing a few more books, I've got to step it up a little bit.
Now, when you say it took you 14 years, you certainly made it up for it in terms of the volume of the novel. I want to stay in this space in terms of the writing process before we delve into the book itself, because I always appreciate, and amongst our audience, we have aspiring writers, aspiring creatives, and also established writers. So we're always quite curious. Do you light a candle? Do you have a special pen? But this idea, and if I may quote your words to you, and I'm going to do this often in this session, you describe writing as a mysterious process. I introduced you with your medical background, and we've spoken about that. Just making that transition in terms of your profession in the medicine industry, but also writing. So give us more of an insight, your process, how you go about doing it.
Well, it really is a mysterious process for me in terms of what actually happens when you sit down, because I think you can have a plan, and maybe this is a good time to talk about, the two kinds of writers as I see it. There are some who, people like John Irving, for example. John knows the whole story before he begins. He knows the first and last line of every chapter. He has been a friend and a mentor, and he has said to me, Abraham, you have to know what you're hiding under the table and when you're going to reveal it to the reader. And if you're just making it up as you're going along, then Abraham, you're not a writer, you're an ordinary liar. But I've also talked to people like Michael Ondaatje, who lives in the same city as John in Toronto, and clearly I felt that he's not that kind of writer. His process seems much more fluid, and I put the same question to him, and he had a very interesting answer. He says, if you're the kind of person who sort of discovers the story as you write it, eventually you arrive at the same point that John does before he begins. And that's exactly what happened to me. 7 years into writing this, I could suddenly see very clearly what the ending was. And it was such a beautiful moment. And then I could make sure that every line, every scene, was leading up to that finale. And so, I wish I could be more efficient, but it has not been easy. I should also tell you that I have this fetish for going to bookstores, to the bell letters section of the bookstores, and buying every how-to book on, how to write your novel in 21 days, as opposed to 14 years. And it's something that I keep hoping someone has the mystery sorted out. But I finally abandoned the process when I picked up the latest to find that they're quoting me, So the mystery will remain a mystery for a long time, I think.
And I'm sure they'll be quoting from this session as well. Abraham, you're so candid and humble and modest in your approach. I've heard you speak about your plotting of these epic sagas. You have a whiteboard, and you're very visual. You actually draw out the characters. I don't know if any of you have seen the images being shared on social media. Oprah certainly shared it in her book club review of your book. You're a brilliant artist. And then there's a point at which you wipe the whiteboard in order to start all over again. And I recall you saying that, using a maxim, that character is determined by decisions taken under pressure. And you put your characters under pressure, and they make their own decisions and go in a direction that you haven't anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I tried the whiteboard with this book because I was determined to take less than 8 years, which is what Cutting for Stone took. And so I had the whole living room wall, which is where I appropriated for my writing, because I never saw the utility of sofas that nobody ever sits on and covers with lace, So I took it over, put the whiteboard there, spent a lot of time working out the entire story, was very happy with it. I am very visual, so I actually had drawn the characters' faces. I could see them, and as best I could see them, I put them up there. And then, you start writing, but as you said, this is an old writing maxim, that character is determined by decisions taken under pressure. The house is burning. Does the character dive back in to rescue someone, or, flee for their life, his or her life? And so I would reach these sort of important pressure points, and my characters would clearly sort of indicate that this did not ring true. And so then I would have to stop, photograph the board, wipe it clean, and then begin again. So after a while, the whiteboard became kind of like this conversation topic. It had no real utility for me, because it was the thread of the writing that I picked up every day that mattered the most. And, I think that even that can mislead you, because I would go down certain paths for 6 months, hundreds of pages perhaps, only to find that that was not the story. And, I don't really know a better way for me to find that out, or any other way, except by going down that path. And so, I think I'm resigned to the fact that this is how I'll do it, and I can just pray that it's a bit faster the next time round.
That's an incredible process. And as we've alluded to there, we've used the word visual. So it's a very visual process for you. And what you evoke for us is very visual and visceral. Kerala. Let's start with the character of Kerala before we speak of the characters in a more traditional fashion. This has an ancestral link to your family. Let's share that with the audience. But also, I'm intrigued, did you have to visit Kerala again in order to remind yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so Kerala is a unique part of India, as many of you here know, a narrow coastal strip of territory with, sandwiched between a mountain range on one side and the ocean on the other, with 44 rivers coming down and breaking into lattice work of ponds, lagoons, back channels. And the monsoon is like the annual beating heart of this giant circulatory system. And so, water is very much a metaphor for, I think, more than the geography of the land, for also the people. It's just sort of the great connector. People learn to swim before they walk, literally. I knew Kerala well because every summer we would spend our holidays in Kerala. My parents were teachers in Africa, but I was born in Africa. I speak Amharic to this day very fluently, and, I saw that as my land. And so to set a novel in Kerala for me was a bit of a daunting thing. And I was encouraged mostly because of a manuscript left by my mother. I don't know if I'm going too long on this answer.
No, we're really intrigued. We're hanging on your every word.
Well, when I was finished with Cutting for Stone, I was hunting around for another geography, because I think perhaps the most important decision you make in a novel is where you set it, at least the kind of novel I want to write.
And your debut, of course, was set in Ethiopia.
Exactly,
Yes.
and that was more natural because I was born there, I knew it well. It echoed my journey in some ways. But, Napoleon says that geography is destiny. And it certainly has been true in my life because, my parents' destiny changed when they took these jobs in Africa in the 1940s. And because I was born there, my destiny was different and so on. But I didn't feel confident setting a novel in Kerala because Malayalis, people from Kerala, can be very critical, It's just in their persona. Maybe it goes with the water. So if you happen to be elected president, your mother will be in the audience and she'll say to the person next door, my son, he could have been a doctor, So I just knew that, I just felt I'd get a lot of, flack. But I happened to pick up a manuscript that my mother had written. Because when my mom was in her 70s, her 5-year-old niece, her 5-year-old granddaughter, my niece, whose name is the same as my mother's, Mariam, she asked my mother, she said, Ammachi, which means grandmother, what was it like when you were 5 years old? And my mother was just blown away by this question. How does she convey to a 5-year-old girl in Boston what her life was like in Kerala, without electricity, without water, which, by the way, was no deprivation. One of the most fun things about our visits to Kerala was the surreal quality of light in the evening with all these lamps lit and drawing water from the well. I never felt it to be a deprivation. And so my mother began to write in a school notebook. She was a school teacher. In her elegant hand, anecdotes of her childhood, and she illustrated these with quick sketches. She was a very good artist, and we've tried to reproduce that quality of sketch in the book. And I picked up this treasure that we've all got copies of in the family after Cutting for Stone, and I suddenly had this epiphany that this is such a unique geography, such a unique community within the larger Kerala community, that it really is a great place to set a novel. And so then my mom became my #1 researcher. She was so excited. She was by then in her 90s, so a lot of time had passed. And even a few weeks before she passed away, before the novel came out, long before, she called me up with another anecdote she'd recalled, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that it was the same anecdote she told me the day before. But Mom didn't live to see it, but she was an extraordinary help. I made many visits But there's always a point where you realize that research is an excuse not to write, and you just have to knuckle down and begin the story. I had more than enough information. I had great sources and help from a lot of different people, and so I just embarked on it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That makes the book even more touching and heart-rending for us. And she lives through the book and through the research. You've mentioned so many points. I want to pull on all those threads, but I am going to open it up to the audience in just a moment. Just to say, you mentioned water there. You mentioned the family history. We've talked a little bit about setting the scenes in terms of Kerala, Ammachi. Let's get on to Ammachi, just because otherwise we're not going to get a chance to delve into our characters. Strong women in your family. I can already sense that in terms of your mother's story, but your grandmother's story as well really influence your writing. You talk a lot about spending time in your grandmother's kitchen. This is very obvious in your detailed writing of the food scenes, the kitchen scenes. Why was it so significant for you to put women at the heart of this book, and women of that era, women of that society at the heart of this book?
Yeah, you know, I really didn't have a great sense of story, but I did know a few things, and one was that I really wanted to pay tribute to women like my two grandmothers, women that you all know, heroic women who go unheralded. The world will never know just how strong they were. They were both incredible women. They both lost, in one case, my grandmother lost her only son to typhoid at 11. My other grandmother lost her oldest son, my father's oldest brother, at 16 when he fended a dog off that was bothering the kids. My father remembers this. He was 5, and the dog nipped him, and a month later he developed a meningoencephalitis, which was clearly rabies, with a lot of all the classic symptoms, and died. And somehow their faith was so solid, their strength, quiet strength, was so solid that they not only survived it but carried everybody with them. So I knew one thing, that I wanted the story to be long enough to cover their time period, but also to cover 2 more generations, to sort of have their pervasive influence be manifest in the next generation and the next. And that's just about all I knew. Both my grandmothers were married incredibly young, but to incredibly young boys too. They really were children in a household. In fact, on the book tour, I met a relative who was saying about one of my grandmothers that because they marry so young, they become so close to their mother-in-laws, who become effectively the mother. And she went to her mother-in-law and sat in her lap, because these are little girls at some level, and the marriage is not going to be consummated for a long time. She sat in her lap and she said, "Ammachi, of all those boys, that one is so irritating. Can we get rid of him?" And that was her husband. They went on to have a wonderful marriage, but I think I was intrigued by the idea of beginning there with something that to most readers would seem most, just not something that is going to end well, and to surprise them with a really great love story. And so that was the only sort of thing I did know. I also knew that I wanted to introduce a medical condition, something that one of the great blessings of my life, 40 years now in medicine, is that I've had the opportunity to watch diseases for which we only had a vague name, maybe even an incorrect name, and then over the decades watch as we establish a causative mechanism or agent, find out the cellular mechanism, and then even the molecular mechanism, and then actually design based on that, the perfect drug to block to block the receptor that is responsible for the pathophysiology. So I wanted 3 generations in order to show the first generation suffering with this, and then in the second and third have it finally revealed. So there was a lot of conceit in this novel, trying to do those things. But that's about all I knew as I embarked on it.
Extraordinary. And again, we're hanging on your every word. As you mentioned there, writing about the insights you've had from your medical profession have really been part of your life from an early stage, before the fiction writing came about. You have non-fiction writing. There's one particular book that you have, My Own Country, your memoir, and treating AIDS patients in rural Tennessee during the 80s. So that kind of first-hand experience of infectious diseases, perhaps that's what you were speaking about not knowing the name and of a particular condition, or?
Well, actually, that played out in about 15 years from the time the first cases were discovered to in 5 years, we knew the agent, and then it took too long, to be honest. I lost so many friends, I call them, patients I knew so well in the decade or so. But I'm thinking more of other diseases that have had even longer times for us to make any sort of impact. I should mention parenthetically that I never intended to be a writer. It was never on my radar. My highest ambition was achieved when I became a physician.
Do you think, and that's extraordinary, but writing
and
if
I could just add
yes,
to that,
please.
So I was very content doing that. And then in the HIV era, I had this extraordinary experience of finishing my training in Boston just about the time HIV was coming about, seeing the first patients with HIV in Boston City Hospital, almost all gay men who had these bizarre infections. I was still in Boston when the cause for this was discovered, and we had an ELISA test. We could test people, and it became clear that for every one person in the hospital, there were hundreds out there carrying the virus. But I still thought that this won't take long to sort out. And I was moving to Johnson City, Tennessee, small town, 50,000. And everyone said that I could expect to see one HIV patient every other year, maybe. But that turned out to be horribly wrong. I actually wound up seeing 100 patients in a fairly short time. And the mystery of why this town should have so much HIV wasn't that big a mystery after all. I felt that I'd stumbled onto a paradigm that was playing out in every little town in America. And the paradigm goes like this. A young man grows up in a small town and leaves for all the same reasons you and I leave small towns: jobs, opportunities, education. But they were also leaving because they were gay and did not want to live that lifestyle under the close scrutiny of their friends and relatives. They went to the big city, found themselves, and sometimes decades later, the virus had found them. And typically, their partners had died. Now they were sick, and they were coming back, and there I was. And so I wrote a scientific paper describing this phenomenon of migration, convinced that it was happening everywhere. But even as I wrote the paper, and it got a lot of attention, I felt the language of science did not begin to capture the heartache of this journey, did not begin to capture the tragic nature of this voyage, the parents' heartbreak, or my own grief at watching people I got incredibly close to, my age at the time, in their 30s, dying. And so that was the moment I became a writer. I thought I would do it through fiction. It's a long story how it wound up being nonfiction, but that was the moment that I decided I would try to write.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and that's, yes, absolutely. And for trusting us to go down that path. I think it's really important to visit your early days of writing from the non-fiction, coming into actually this fictional, phenomenal book. You do describe, to be a good physician, you have to be a good listener. To be a good writer, you have to be a good observer. That's the link that you make between the two professions. Now, science, faith, spirituality, they run throughout the course of your epic saga here. When we speak about the other main characters of the book, the idealistic Scottish surgeon, let's talk about why you introduce him here. So you have the family based in Kerala, the 3 generations. We're going to talk about the condition in just a moment. But why him? Why introduce him?
I mean, I think it's hard to write about India between 1900 and 1977, especially the early part, without acknowledging that that was what India was like. The healthcare was largely the British healthcare system. I trained in Madras Medical College, founded in 17-something, by the British. And all the professors and all the portraits on the wall were of British professors. And it was only by the time I came that it was all Indian. So you really can't write about healthcare without having expatriate physicians like Digby. So someone asked me whether I had done this to pander to Western audiences, and I said, not at all. This is the reality of what India was. It was a lot of these individuals. The same in the States. It was, all adventurous British, Europeans, Swiss people, going up there. So yeah, no, I think Western characters were organic to that kind of a story.
And of course, he offers a completely different perspective. His journey of transformation does echo Ammachi's in terms of transformation, the redemption, and actual change. But his is one of love and loss from a very different perspective. Through him, you explored the notion of belonging, being an outsider, but actually embracing a new land.
Yeah, I think I was intrigued by the notion of someone like Digby, a Scottish physician, not English, which is one layer of perhaps potential prejudice in the future for him. And he's a Catholic from Glasgow, from the wrong side of the track, so to speak. And his opportunities dry up in Glasgow precisely because of his faith and it's because of his faith. And so he comes to India to be in the British Health Service, the Indian Medical Service, and to learn, get more experience as a surgeon. And there he finds out that he's at the very top of the hierarchy of people oppressing people, and it goes on for layers and layers and layers. And so I thought it was an intriguing way to bring this to light, was to bring someone like him to Madras, and yet give him enough insight that he's very well aware of and empathetic to what is transpiring here. So he was sort of a very beloved character, another way to shed light on what is otherwise a very confusing situation.
And you mentioned the word there, faith, his faith playing a key role in his life journey. The faith of the community in Kerala, that's of course central to the book as well. How much research did that take on your behalf, your personal insights? Why was that really important for you to really give us a good grounding in this?
Well, it actually wasn't hard for me to talk about the St. Thomas or Syrian Christian faith of the relatively small group of people in Kerala, because, I was brought up in that tradition. Even though I was growing up in Ethiopia, the emperor of Ethiopia was the head of an ancient Christian kingdom. He had deliberately hired most of his teachers from this small Christian community in Kerala. In fact, I see the granddaughter of one of the priests who was running our church services sitting here. And so there was a large community of Kerala Christians. We had our own church service in the church the emperor held his service in. When he was done, he let us worship there. I mean, so this doesn't mean that I was in any way caught up with it. I was a 5-year-old or 6-year-old restless at having to stand through these 3-hour services, most of which is in Syriac, a language that not even my parents understand. And yet, over time, the words become familiar. So I knew a lot about our faith. I think I was trying to explore the context of that faith. I also could see the power of that faith in people like my grandmother and to some degree my parents. I mean, for my grandmother's religion was concrete. It was as solid as this table. It was the sort that made us envious, and yet it's not something that I could easily, I just couldn't be the way they were, barring some step that I was missing at the point. And so people often assume that I am very religious or I'm proselytizing. Again, I really wasn't. I was trying to be true to the times and to the kind of people I was describing, including my parents. I mean, my father is with my brother in Boston right now. He's 99 years old and doing fairly well, touch wood. And every Saturday, he watches the church service in the church where he was baptized, where his father was a deacon, where he was an altar boy, where his parents are buried. And I sit with him when I'm in Boston, which is fairly often these days. And it's sort of eerie because I have this strong sense of connecting with my roots. I still don't understand the Syriac, but it's very familiar, and I feel like I'm I'm sort of reconnecting with a sort of a ancient tradition that is one that I can claim, given that I've lived all over the world and have not been able to really claim a hometown or a geography. This one thing has become more important to me in a strange way. Not so much faith or religion, but the sense of a connection to antiquity through this particular genetic heritage I have.
That's so fascinating. And I think the sense of science and spirituality that run throughout the book, you have this wonderful way of giving us the context, but also making it very accessible to us as well, just the right amount of detail. You mentioned language and the importance of language. It plays a unique role in your book. Why was that important to you?
The place of, I'm sorry.
Language in terms of actually introducing us to language of Kerala. Malayalam, that will be something that I believe our audience here in the UAE will really appreciate.
Well, I think that if you mean the language construct of each sentence, or you mean the language of Kerala?
The language of Kerala,
okay.
Also.
Yeah, I mean, so it was really challenging. Here I am writing in English. I'm by no means a fluent speaker of Malayalam. All the great Malayalam literature that I read is only that's been translated to English. Otherwise, I'm really not familiar with it. But I was trying my best to sort of imitate the cadence of the speech, the sort of sometimes a circular way things are presented. So you do the best you can, and to some degree I think I've succeeded, because people seem to have gotten a sense of both the character and the nature of the sort of local idiom and the patois and how it sort of weaves and wanders. But there were a lot of foreign phrases that I introduced, which for many readers might be off-putting, but there's always a translation. But I think it was necessary to feel that I was being authentic to some degree, as best I could, to the language being spoken.
And speaking of language and the importance of names, why this particular name for the book and the duality of water? Why was that important for you to really set the scene for us in terms of water being both life-giving but life-taking?
Yeah, titles are mysterious, and with Cutting for Stone, I had the title at the outset. I just always loved that phrase, cutting for stone, which is to be found in the Hippocratic Oath. But with this book, we were really fishing around for a title almost to the end. We had a lot of working titles. But water seems like, a natural, given the geography. But more than that, we are 60% more water is our body composition. We gestate for 9 months in water or in a liquid environment, and so on. So, water is just absolutely necessary for life. So water, and then covenant is I have a love affair with certain words that just have a great feel to them. So covenant is one of those words that has all kinds of echoes. It has sort of a way of reaching back in an ancient kind of way that you couldn't quite get with another word that seems the main thing. It's also open to a lot of interpretation. But I always feel that the title should mean whatever the reader thinks it means. I think that I get letters from people saying, especially about Cutting for Stone, what exactly does that mean? And, I think it harks back to something we haven't talked about, but might be interesting to the audience, that I always believe that the writer's job is to provide the words in this sort of arc. The reader, because we're nothing without readers, the reader provides their imagination, and then somewhere in middle space, this mental movie takes place in their heads, and it's unique to every reader, which is why if you've ever gone to see the movie version of a book you loved, only to find they cast Antonio Banderas in the part that you had in mind for somebody else, you realize this is very much your construct. And so I really respect it. I mean, I've had theses from people telling me about the archetypal structures and the Jungian themes that I've managed to construct. And I think, oh my God, if only I was that clever, My only goal is a good story well told. But they're not wrong. This is what it meant to them, and it's authentic. And so I don't know how I got into that, but related to your previous question, the sense that I'm only partly in control. So with the title, I'm providing a title that I hope is evocative, and it means whatever the reader thinks it means. So what did it mean to you?
Again, I think it evokes a lot of spirituality, certainly the covenant, and it's such a beautiful word. You just want to repeat it. And then water, just having visited Kerala, you're absolutely right. It's central to the life of Keralans. It was just something that just pulled you in. And then, of course, we should talk about the condition, which is, the thread throughout the book. I know that we're being deliberately thematic today because we want to ensure that we don't have any spoilers. There may be audience members who are new to the book or halfway through the book. But the condition.
Yeah, so the condition, as I mentioned, I wanted to introduce something in the family that they would have to be, or try to be, secretive about. And I guess I was impressed from a very early age how important family reputation was in our community, but I think in all communities, but more so where the marriage prospects of a bride or groom, much more so the bride, rested heavily on whether there was this murmur of epilepsy in the family or, mental illness or, so the smallest thing could torpedo somebody's entire future. And so people tended to be cagey. I would also suspect, but I didn't know this for a fact, that in communities like ours that tended to marry from within, there would be some amplifying of recessive genes and more expression of disorders that might not otherwise express if you were marrying into the general population. That was a postulate. But after the books come out, I'm astonished to find out how much of this is really true in a sense. So I picked a condition where individuals, and you might wonder where I got this condition. In the 40 years that I have been teaching medicine, I have a collection of rare diseases that I keep in my back pocket. Not
As
literally,
you do.
Don't worry.
As you do.
These are things that I trot out when there's a quiet moment on rounds. I will often trot them out in the form of a riddle. And so one riddle that I often would ask my chief residents or residents would be, what disease causes familial drowning? One member in each generation or more drowning in a bathtub or a pond or in the most unexpected, shallow, not threatening body of water. So I always had that tucked into my brain, and it seemed like a good opportunity to use that. It was based on a very rare 2-case report of a family in Philadelphia, 2 papers with an interval of 30 years between the 2 papers, follow up by another group of doctors. So it's just a bit of arcania, something that you'll never see, I'll never see in my lifetime, so I thought. But introducing that and then having it become solved, but the idea of not being able to swim in Kerala was, huge.
Yes.
And I added this thing of they're frightened of water, which is a bit of a liberty on my part, but it's possible. And come to find out that it's actually one of several other conditions that is is not unknown there, given the genetic testing and the whole genome analysis that we can now do.
That's super intriguing, and it does bring us up to date in terms of what's happening in health in this sphere at the moment. I did promise I'm going to open it up to the audience, so if we can have the mics ready, please do put your hands up. Who wants to ask the first question? And just to tee up the mics, on names and on titles, it's really intriguing that with your main character, if I may call her the main character, Big Ammachi, you only actually reveal her name on page 458. Yes, of Big Ammachi. So we're speaking about words and titles. Her title, her official name, is only revealed quite late in the novel. Why did you do this? What was the reasoning behind this?
Well, it was it was something that gradually happened. I liked the idea of her coming into that house as a 12-year-old girl, marrying an older widower in his 40s who already had a couple of kids. And by the way, that was actually the true story of my great-grandmother. I didn't know her, but she married at the age of 10 or something to an older widower. And, he had a couple of kids. But by all accounts, it was one of the joyous, most incredible marriages. People still talked about it long after they died. She had more children with him. And so, I began with her, a character like her, a 12-year-old coming into this house, just sort of being awed by the vastness of it compared to where she had been, being really cared for by her sister-in-law who becomes a surrogate mother. And she has no power, she has no agency. She's just a little waif here. She spots her husband once in the church and then rarely after that, and doesn't realize that he is keeping his distance because he is a scary individual in terms of his age, his size, and gradually she sort of begins to see how his love is manifesting. So, I think I really wanted to only name her when she felt herself that she belonged. And so there is this moment where her stepson, who she raises like a son, a very small boy, calls her, coins a pet name for her. He calls her Big Ammachi. And there's some irony in this because she's a petite, diminutive woman. But to this little boy, she is everything. And she's not just an Ammachi, she's Big Ammachi. And so I love the idea. I had a little pushback from one editor and maybe a reader, but I think eventually I succeeded in convincing them that this was a bit of a conceit, but something I really believed in.
I think you certainly succeed with that impact there. I did promise to open it up to you, and I'm being incredibly selfish and holding on to Abraham myself. So please, may we have your question?
I don't know if this mic is on.
Yes.
So I'm so excited about this book. Thank you for writing this book. It's just been, I think on behalf of everyone, thank you. It's been such an amazing book. And I'm from Madras Medical College, batch of 1983. And I wanted to say when your book was set, you had 30 girls in the class, and we had 65% women in our class in 1983. So it was great. But, just for us, we're big fans from our class. We want to say we are all big fans of your writing. And I just wanted to know how I would say the tragedy of this big government hospital, the poverty, the tragedy. You've obviously been really affected by the tragedy in Tennessee, but Madras, I felt like just working in that hospital, it was tragic. And whether it informed your writing or your experiences in any way.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your very kind words. And I must have just missed you. I graduated, I think, in 79. I think the privilege of training in a large government hospital was something very special for us. But you're right. It certainly wasn't ideal conditions for the patients. And yet, it was far better than the alternative, which was nothing. And so I like to remember the sort of heroic yeoman service performed, especially in surgery, but also in medicine, for so many people. But it was striking to me, looking back at myself, we were incredibly young. I don't think we had the maturity to even understand what people were completely going through. And so I feel bad about that. And I had a chance to visit several times over the years. It's nice to see, lots of advances. It's nice to see great opportunities outside the medical school in the private industry that I think secondarily have also forced government hospitals to elevate their game. But, given the resources, I think they provide yeoman service. And honestly, I've trained all my career, except now at Stanford, I've been at inner city county hospitals, and it's a matter of scale, but I'm not sure there's a great difference in some of the suffering that one witnesses, some of which might easily, with some more resources, have been different.
Fantastic question, and thank you for sharing your personal experience. We have more questions. Can we make sure the mics
I've got a mic. I'm
moved
going to
around?
go now, if that's okay.
Fantastic. Yes,
Got
go
the
for
mic.
it.
Hello. I have a very specific question, actually. I really enjoyed all the references to art throughout the book. I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, I read the book some time ago, but the daughter-in-law of Big Ammachi makes this stone sculpture that gets damaged, and she never finishes it. And I want to know, what was it going to be, and what was the meaning behind it? It really left me hanging, actually.
I believe it's Mariama, her name.
No, I
yes.
think the artist is Elsie. You're talking about Elsie.
Correct.
Yeah,
Elsie,
yeah.
Elsie.
So I don't quite know how that character really came about. Talking about mystery, because I really believe that. I think sometimes you have to sit in the chair, and then there are these moments, sometimes through repeated revision, where a character, as you keep adding layers to try and make them more three-dimensional, they take on something that you didn't quite expect. But like with seeing the ending, that kind of epiphany, that's what allows me to sort of keep doing this otherwise grueling business of sitting there and going in the wrong direction for months on end, and the frustration of reading your writing the next morning and realizing how awful it was what you did last night. What keeps you going? It's those moments where something pops up, and I call it the muse, call it God, call it the subconscious. I don't know, but it's the thing I live for. So I don't quite know how I got the notion of Elsie as an artist, but I think I'm very interested in Indian art, and I was reading a lot about the art of Kerala, and it struck me that, barring one exception, there was almost no mention of Indian women artists of that period, simply because they never had the opportunity. I mean, a man like Ravi Raja Verma, almost every Indian knows his paintings because they're iconic. They're on calendars, they're everywhere. But Raja Ravi Verma was from a royal family, and if he decided he wanted to paint and go to Paris or whatever, he could do that. Even if he had a sister, she probably could not have done that. And so I think I was very much trying to create the character of an extremely talented woman artist who, because of the social constructs of her era, would really be challenged to reach her full genius. Even though her husband has intubations and tries his best to enable her art, as you know, it doesn't quite succeed in that task. So that's where it came from. Thank you.
Thanks. Not what I was hoping. I wanted, it was going to be a cow, but it's fine.
I think
Thank you so
the
much.
question was, what was the actual structure that she was creating, her artistry? Yes, but we can ask that off stage, because I think maybe we want to keep some mystery alive. Yes. The gentleman, and then can we make sure we get some questions over here, if we can get the mics over here. So gentleman, please.
Hi. I just lost my grandma last week, and when I was noting down.
Sorry, if you could hold the mic right to your lips, and condolences for your family's loss.
She was close to 90, but she lost a son in a drowning incident. We live in front of a river and back in Kerala. And like you said, the fear of water is unusual in Kerala. Like, it's not improbable, but in my family, we are all asked to stay away from the water as much as possible. So that is really a possibility, that someone dies in the family drowning, and then everyone else is asked to stay away. No, that was not my question. My question was going to be about, like, when I was reading your book, it felt like I was reading a Malayalam novel in English, and it is so very close to anything Malayali would have written. But you yourself said that you have read only in translation, which I find so fascinating. So, can you name a few authors who everyone should read, like, as a quintessential Malayalam writing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for both parts of your question. I was astonished by how many readers told me about family members who had drowned, typically by suicide, and it was not much talked about. It was always, very much a painful thing to ever discuss. Very few of those are related to the condition. The second part, the highest praise that I could possibly have is for you to say what you just did, that it reads like Malayalam, which was my intention. So I read everything that Paul Zachariah has written, O.V. Vijay, and all the greats who have been translated. And there's a fairly long list. But there's a very long list of people who I will never read unless they're translated. And so I'm just back from from India a few days ago. I was in Chennai and Calcutta and Calicut, and my last act at every place is to buy as many new translations of Bengali or Tamil or other books that I can get my hands on. There's still not enough. So I would name Goat Days, which is based in the Gulf. Most of you would know that book, a very interesting book. And then there's Misha. There's too many for me to just rattle offhand, but there are enough, I must say, but not as many as truly exist out there. And I think my worst, not nightmare, but my sadness is India has so many major regional languages, and there's probably the most brilliant literature out there. I'll never know it. Conversely, when I read and admire, as I do, Dostoevsky or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I always wonder how much have I lost in translation. I spent many years in Texas, and so I tried to read Marquez in Spanish with the English side by side, which perhaps helped my Spanish a great deal, but it was too arduous, and so after a while I just gave up. But we have to trust the translators to give us what we want. But thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
I think you perfectly set up my next question. Hi.
Oh, there you are, yes, at the back.
We met earlier. It's good to see you. I'm from Houston as well. And when we spoke earlier, I didn't realize I also did HIV research in Houston in the early 90s. So the way that you articulated that was beautiful. One thing you just mentioned, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, my favorite book, 100 Years of Solitude. And I think both in The Covenant of Water and in Cutting for Stone, there was a bit of magical realism that sort of referenced Isabel Allende or referenced Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and which I loved. And I loved that piece of the magical realism in with the realistic portrayal of the characters. But I read recently that The Covenant of Water was going to be turned into a Netflix miniseries. And I know that 100 Years of Solitude was just done. I've not had the courage to watch it because the book is so precious to me. But my question is, how do you relinquish control of these characters that are so important to you and that you've nurtured for so many years? And how do you feel about seeing that being put on screen? Is it something that's exciting, exhilarating, or is it something that's frightening?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, and it was nice to meet you earlier. I think I don't really see myself as having tried to write magical realism. I was, again, describing characters like my grandmothers, for whom things like, spirits and possession and all this was very, very real. And so as a child, you took it to be real. I don't think I took too many liberties with that. So I was actually, not engaging in any magical realism. People forecasting the future. It's interesting that I have a character, Baby Moll, in the book who can see events coming. There's now a whole series of studies and reports on autistic children having this amazing ability to foresee things. I don't quite understand it all yet. So I really don't think I was trying to do magical realism, but parenthetically, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And after reading all his books, when his first volume of autobiography came out, I couldn't wait to read it. And I began to read it. It's talking about his childhood. And I realized that all that stuff was actually happening in his childhood. He had characters, who were seeing ghosts or, bizarre people. And I think he might say this wasn't magical realism. This was the way people lived the world in that part of Colombia where he was from. The second part about the Netflix, I share your concern. I think for years, Gabriel Garcia Marquez did not want to relinquish the rights to any of his books for the reason we talked about. He felt every reader had their construct of the book, and he didn't want to shatter that. We watched a few episodes of the Netflix 100 Years of Solitude, and I think it's beautifully done, but I began to shrink away, feeling like I'd rather stay with my little mental movie, which is probably very unfair. But in terms of the rights to my book, I was delighted that Harpo Studios, Oprah, wanted the rights, and that they then managed to sell it to Netflix or get Netflix on board. I'm very happy with that because I see these as two completely different art forms, and that's the only way to do it. I don't think one can go to a movie and judge it by the book, and conversely, you know, they're very different. It's a different. I watch a lot of movies, and I'm always struck by how passive my reactions are, in a sense. You know, everything is laid out for me, just about. There's some stuff to imagine, and a good actor will leave you a lot more to imagine. But compare that to a novel where, you know, you're taking these little digital signals we call words on a page, go into your cortex, and you're generating every single image. It's a completely different thing. So I'm fine with it. I've also learned that the movie business is incredibly fickle. I mean, if it's a book, it's a writer, with luck, one publisher, and then you're in business. But a movie has so many individuals that I had the good fortune to have my first book made into a movie directed by Meera Nair and with Naveen Andrews. It was well done. But nothing since has gone that way. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of promises, people come and go. So I sort of stay back. I'm not involved. Be very happy if they make it, and very happy if it does very well, and hopefully doesn't hurt the book. I don't think it will. I think these are really good people. So I have a lot of faith that they're going to do an extraordinary job and create a very different art form. It's not the book. It's something hopefully better.
And speaking of art forms, speaking of different formats, I know that we also want to mention audiobooks. And just to say, on the Oprah front, to have your book in the hands of Oprah, how phenomenal is this? So we certainly can have a lot more trust in the creative process because of that. But audiobooks, I know you wanted to mention this particular point because, of course, you do actually read your book for us.
In the audiobook?
Yes, the audiobook for Covenant of Water.
I'm sorry, as you can tell, I struggle a little bit with my hearing, which is why hearing is a major theme in the book. It's because I think it was a major theme in my life for the last decade or more. The audiobook was interesting. I found that I was listening to more and more audiobooks. Cutting for Stone was recorded by a young Indian-American actor in Los Angeles. And when I first heard it, I found myself objecting to the ways he was pronouncing certain words. I might have been the only person who got that, but I don't think so. For example, there's a way that you can say Madras that a North Indian might choose to say in a contemptuous way as Madras, very harsh, which would sound wrong to someone from Madras. And so, he was doing some things like that which was just really getting under my skin, and I was almost up in arms about it. And then I finally, I wasn't able to do anything about it. It's already been done. I met him at a festival in Los Angeles, and he was the most delightful young man. I didn't have the heart to say, anything at all. But with this book, it's so full of ethnic phrases, so full of regional accents and languages. I auditioned to record it because it's not a given, and most writers, you don't want them reading their own novel to you, honestly. With nonfiction, it's kosher for the nonfiction writer to read their own book. It's their book. But, if you look at Anne Patchett's latest, it's Meryl Streep who performs it, and Brad Pitt. People, they get high-paid actors to do the performance of a book. And so I said to them, let me audition. I'll send you a tape. If you can find someone who can do this better, I'm all for it. But I really thought even Meryl Streep would struggle with some Malayalam and Tamil terms and the accents of a South Indian Malayali versus a Tamilian. And I was delighted that they agreed, and it was a wonderful learning process. I had a wonderful producer and technician, and I learned how to pitch my voice on the page so that you could tell a woman was speaking versus a man, but not overdoing it. I learned to do Glaswegian accents and upper crust British, and also the regional Indian accents, South Indian, Tamil, Malayalam. So I'm sure I didn't get it perfectly right, but I think I did it better than Meryl Streep might have done. I don't know.
No offense to Meryl. I love these anecdotes because this is what makes festivals like this so special. So thank you for sharing that you had to audition for your own audiobook. We've got only a few minutes on the clock, so can we please get the mics very quickly to very short questions, please, so we can get around a few people. Thank you.
Hi, I must say that this whole journey of reading has been too overwhelming because I've been crying since the first page because I was hormonal, and I've cried at the last page because I couldn't let go, and I thought, how am I ever going to read another book again? But coming to the writing part, as a writer, I want to know, each time you kill a character, do you pause and be like, okay, what happens next? Or do you already know how that death is going to impact the family?
Thank you so much for that comment.
It's a very pointed question. When you murder your characters, how do you feel?
You know, I think I've heard that a fair amount, that do I have this fetish for death in my characters? But again, I would say that perhaps I'm more aware of death than many people, just given the nature of what I've done or what I do. You know, life is a terminal condition. I hope that's not news to you.
No.
And so, you know, I think that knowledge lends life poignancy. You know, a rose would just be a weed if it lived forever. But because it blooms and withers after a ephemeral moment of great beauty, it is an object that we sort of revere and cultivate. So I don't think I was, you know, peppering the book with deaths to titillate myself or you, which I haven't done evidently. But I think I was being true to the character. It was extraordinarily difficult. It was an example of a moment would come when I suddenly knew for no reason that this character was going to die. I wasn't, you know, consciously deciding to do it. And, you know, I have revised chapters hundreds of times. I've had my partner Kerry read back. I like to hear the sound of what I've written, so she's read some of those sections back to me. We're both in tears every time that we get to that. Those are very difficult. And if it doesn't move me, how's it going to move you? When we were recording the audiobook, my goodness, you know, the technician, the producer, and I were all choking up. I think you can actually even hear it at times on the page. We kept having to pause and pick up because, you know, if the characters are real, then something is happening to you. So I love what Camus says. I'm paraphrasing. Camus says that fiction is the great lie that tells the truth about how the world lives. And so if it moved you, it's because it echoes with something inside you that knows this is life. And I'm sorry, but life is equally sad as much as it's happy, and I get to see a disproportionate amount, I suspect, of the sadness and the death, which is part of life. So I can't help that it creeps in there more than perhaps, you know, if I were, I don't know, in some other profession.
Thank you for that. And maybe just time for one more question. I think the lady at the front has been very patiently holding her hand up with a lot of passion. So I'm going to come to the lady in the front.
You spoke of the arc, the writer's part of the arc, and then the reader and their contribution. And speaking of Elsie, and when she did come back, when she came back home, when she came back, seemingly unwillingly, and
may I just suggest that you don't say anything that gives away the total?
Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
yes, no spoilers.
I wondered what was she yearning for? What was she looking out across the fields for? What was she? Was there a story, a whole other story there? And when the sculpture came, and I imagined it, as a reader would, as a woman being carved out of stone, reaching for something across the water.
Great, thank you so much. Only because we're out of time, so a hint at that without a spoiler.
I mean, I think that I really do leave that to you to try and project. I mean, I think I may have my own sort of ideas, but I saw her as just being hemmed in by all the social realities of a life of a woman, a wife, while trying to, you know, also engage herself fully as an artist. And at some point, she has to navigate her way through that. I love sculpture. At Stanford, I parked my car right next to the Rodin Sculpture Garden. So almost every day I'm walking past these great outdoor Rodin sculptures, and I've had a lot of time to think about some of them and to read more about them. And I suppose sculpture has been on my mind for that reason. But I do think it's all yours to figure out what she was thinking. I'm sorry not to have the clue, the answer to that.
You will have a chance to speak to Abraham personally. He'll be doing a book signing after this, so we do encourage you all to come along to the book signing. But I'm just going to end by saying that we bring this festival together with all of our partners and sponsors. So I'm just going to mention them now. Our title sponsor is the Emirates Airline. Our founding partner, Dubai Health. Our parent organization, of course, is the Emirates Literature Foundation, and Dubai Health as well with us, bringing this all together. I want to give Abraham the last final words to you all. The audience member summed it up there beautifully. She said at the end of the book, she felt bereft. We feel bereft, and we're going to feel bereft when you leave us, Abraham. But please leave us with some inspiring words.
Well, I can tell you the most inspiring thing for a writer is to be with readers, because you write in such isolation. You're picturing this moment when a reader is engaging with your words, and you're very conscious that you don't want to give her or him more than they need, but make sure you're giving them as much as they need. And so to actually be with readers and to sort of finally have this experience of the two arcs meeting, so to speak, is very, very special. I can tell you what's even more special is having someone like you, with your ease on stage, making it seem like we're just having a conversation in a living room. So thank you for being so gracious, for really studying my work so well.
It's very generous of you. I'm only as good as the team behind me, so I'm just really pleased to have Isabel and Acclaim's support and the whole team here at the festival. They're brilliant. They are the ones that organize for people like yourself to take time out of your busy day job and night job and meet us here. You've been very generous with your time, very candid.
But did I give you the pithy phrase you wanted? If not, I've got one.
Oh, we always love the pithy phrase, please.
So to leave you with an idea, I don't know of any instrument in our modern lives that stops time the way a good novel does. It's why I read.
Aww.
I read for this sensation of picking up a book, and by 3 pages, if they're doing their job right, you suspend disbelief and you live through centuries sometimes, or at least decades, and births and deaths, and you put the book down and it's still Tuesday. And I think that magic is, why you're here. It's why I read, it's why I write. So thank you so much for
Thank you. Thank you. That's beautiful. We don't want to let you go, but I'm just going to make a special mention that here in the UAE, which is such a fantastically inclusive community, we're so fortunate that we get to work with our Emirati sisters and brothers who make it a home for all of us. Your books in particular really resonate with us. We are all seeking belonging and home, and people like Isabel have been instrumental in allowing us to be part of this community. So thank you, Abraham, for speaking to us directly. Please do return to the festival. Another big round of applause for Abraham Verghese. Thank you. Thank you. And Abraham will be available for the book signing. Please do follow our colleagues for that, and we'll whisk Abraham to you. I'm going to...